On September 21st, 1327, King Edward II of England died at Berkeley Castle in one of the most brutal executions in medieval history. According to the official story, his captors held him down and inserted a red-hot poker into his body, a method designed to kill him without leaving external marks. It was the perfect political murder, except nobody ever saw his face at the funeral. His widow, Queen Isabella, the woman who'd overthrown him, refused to allow a state funeral with an open casket. And 3 years later, the Earl of Kent was executed for treason because he believed Edward was still alive and tried to rescue him. Then there's this, a letter written by an Italian bishop claiming Edward escaped to Europe and lived as a hermit for 14 more years. So here's the question nobody wants to ask. If Edward II died at Berkeley Castle, what if his own wife staged his murder to keep him from ever reclaiming his throne? Today we're investigating one of medieval England's greatest conspiracies. And by the end, you'll see how this 700-year-old playbook is still being used today. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. I investigate the hidden forces behind history, from royal murders and lost colonies to modern elites, NGOs, and propaganda. And this is the hidden truth about Edward II. Welcome back to the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO and co-founder of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to appear on some of the biggest podcasts out there. You want to see how we can help you? Grab our free brand authority analysis. Head over to commandyourbrand.com/analysis. Reminder, if you're brand new to this channel, to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash that subscribe button if you want to learn more of history's mysteries. So let me give you the version they teach in the history books. Edward II became King of England in 1307. He was a disaster from the start, militarily weak, politically incompetent, and obsessed with his male favorites to the point where he ignored his royal duties. His biggest mistake? Elevating Hugh Despencer, the Younger, to become the most powerful man in England. Despencer wasn't just Edward's favorite. He was ruthless, corrupt, and used the king's protection to seize lands and wealth from English nobles. This included lands belonging to Edward's own wife, Isabella of France. By 1325, Isabella had enough. Edward sent her to France to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV. But instead of coming back, she stayed in Paris and started plotting. She found an ally, Richard Mortimer, an exiled English baron who'd escaped from the Tower of London. Together, they became lovers and co-conspirators. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer invaded England with a small army. And here's what's remarkable. They barely had to fight. English nobles flocked to Isabella's banner. Why? Because they hated Despencer more than they feared treason. Within weeks, Edward's support collapsed. Edward and Despencer fled west, trying to escape to Ireland. They didn't make it. In November 1326, they were captured in Wales. Despencer was executed immediately, hanged, drawn, and quartered in one of the most brutal public executions medieval England had ever seen. Edward was imprisoned. On January 20th, 1327, Parliament forced Edward to abdicate in favor of his 14-year-old son, who became Edward III. But here's the problem. Edward II was still alive. As long as he lived, he was a threat. Nobles who regretted supporting Isabella could rally behind him. Foreign powers could use him as a pawn. His son could restore him when he came of age. Isabella and Mortimer had overthrown a king, but they hadn't eliminated the threat. So Edward was moved to Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, under the custody of Lord Thomas Berkeley and two of Mortimer's men, Sir John Maltravers and Sir Thomas Gurney. And that's where the official story says he died. According to the chroniclers writing years later, on the night of September 21st, 1327, Edward II was murdered in his cell. The method? a red-hot poker inserted into his body through a horn, designed to kill him internally without leaving visible marks on his corpse. So why this method? Because Edward was technically still a king. His murderers needed his death to look natural so they could display the body and prove he was dead. Except that's not what happened. Red flag number 1 is that nobody saw his face. When Edward's body was displayed at Berkeley Castle and later at Gloucester, the face was covered. The official reason? Well, the body had been embalmed and needed time to be properly prepared. But here's what's strange. Medieval royal funerals always featured open caskets. The whole point was for witnesses to confirm the king was actually dead. Queen Isabella herself refused to attend the funeral. She stayed away from Gloucester entirely. Why would a widow refuse to see her husband's body unless she knew it wasn't really him? Red flag number 2 is Lord Berkeley's denial. In 1330, when Isabella and Mortimer's regime finally fell, Lord Thomas Berkeley was questioned about Edward's death. His answer? He claimed he wasn't even at Berkeley Castle when Edward died. He said he was away, and when he returned, he was told the king had died of natural causes. Think about that. The man officially in charge of guarding Edward II claimed he didn't know Edward had been murdered. Even though it supposedly happened in his own castle, either Berkeley was lying to save himself, or Edward's death was staged by Maltravers and Gurney without Berkeley's actual knowledge. Red flag number 3 is the Earl of Kent's execution. Here's where it gets really interesting. In 1330, 3 years after Edward supposedly died, Edmund, the Earl of Kent, was executed for treason. His crime? Plotting to rescue Edward II, because he believed Edward was still alive. Now, you might be thinking, Kent was just delusional and a conspiracy theorist. But here's the problem. Kent wasn't some random noble. He was Edward II's own half-brother. He had access to court intelligence. He had connections to people who would know the truth. And according to records, Kent wasn't alone. Several senior clergy members and nobles also believed Edward was alive in 1329 to 1330. They were communicating with someone they believed was Edward, and they were planning to restore him. Why would Edward's own brother and multiple high-ranking officials believe he was alive, unless there was evidence he'd survived? The official story is that they were tricked by Mortimer's agents into believing Edward lived, so that Mortimer could expose and execute them as traitors. But here's another explanation. They believed Edward was alive because he was alive. In the 14th century, a letter surfaced that changes everything. It's called the Fieschi Letter, written by Emanuele Fieschi, an Italian bishop and papal notary who had connections to the English court. The letter was addressed to Edward III, Edward II's son, and it tells a very different story about what happened at Berkeley Castle. According to Fieschi, on the night Edward was supposed to have been murdered, his guards, Maltravers and Gurney, came to kill him, but Edward's porter warned him. Edward killed one of the guards, escaped through a window, and fled. He made his way to Ireland, then to France, and eventually to Italy, where he lived as a hermit in various monasteries. Fieschi claims he personally met Edward and heard this story directly from him. Now, historians have debated the Fieschi Letter for centuries. Some say it's genuine, others call it a forgery or a fantasy. But here's what we know for certain. 1. The letter contains details about Edward's imprisonment that weren't widely known, suggesting the author had inside information. 2. Emanuele Fieschi was a real person with documented connections to the English court and the papacy. He wasn't some random forger. 3. The letter was preserved in a French archive, not an English one, suggesting it was never meant to become public propaganda. And finally, 4. If Edward III received this letter and believed it might be true, it would explain why he later showed mercy to some of the people involved in his father's overthrow, including eventually pardoning Maltravers. According to the Fieschi Letter, Edward lived out his days as a hermit in Italy, moving between monasteries and doing penance for his failures as a king. He never tried to reclaim his throne. He never revealed himself publicly. Why? Because by that point, his son, Edward III, was ruling successfully. Revealing himself would have overthrown England back into chaos. Or because Isabella and Mortimer made it very clear what would happen if he tried to come back. So let's talk about motive. From 1327 to 1330, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England through the teenage Edward III. They controlled the treasury, distributed lands and titles to their supporters, and eliminated anyone who threatened them. As long as Edward II was alive, whether imprisoned or in hiding, he was a threat to their power. If he was actually dead, they needed people to believe so, or no one would try to restore him. If he was alive but hidden, they needed people to believe he was dead for the exact same reason. That's why the Earl of Kent had to die. He was asking too many questions. He had had too much evidence that Edward might actually be alive. Whether Edward was actually alive or not didn't matter. Kent's belief that he was alive made him dangerous. And here's the most interesting part. Edward III never investigated his father's death. In 1330, when he finally overthrew Isabella and Mortimer, he had Mortimer executed and imprisoned his own mother. But he never put anyone on trial for murdering Edward II. Why not? Well, the official explanation is that Edward III wanted to move on and unite the kingdom. But there's another possibility. Edward III knew the truth, or he suspected it, and decided it was better for everyone if his father stayed dead. If Edward II was alive and living as a hermit in Italy, revealing that truth would have been a disaster. It would have raised questions about Edward III's legitimacy. It would have given foreign powers ammunition against England. Better to let the official story stand. So why does this 700-year-old conspiracy matter today? Well, it's because the playbook hasn't changed all that much. When powerful people need someone to disappear, they have two options: actually kill them or make everyone believe they're dead while keeping them alive and hidden. Both achieve the same goal of removing the threat from the board. Think about witness protection programs. When someone becomes too dangerous to prosecute, but too valuable to kill, what do governments do? They give them a new identity, relocate them, and officially declare them missing or dead. Or consider high-profile deaths where the circumstances are suspicious. The evidence is sealed and key witnesses, well, they disappear. The official story gets locked in before anyone can ask hard questions. Look at political dissidents who die in custody under mysterious circumstances, but their bodies are never properly examined. Autopsies are blocked, and families are prevented from independently verifying their death. The Edward II playbook is simple. 1 is to remove the threat from public view. 2, to control the narrative about what happened. 3, to prevent independent verification. 4, to eliminate anyone who questions the official story. And 5, to make sure the people in power benefit from the death. Does this sound familiar? What Edward II's case teaches us is that the official history is written by whoever controls the narrative at that moment. Isabella and Mortimer controlled England from 1327 to 1330. During that time, they controlled what people believed about Edward II's death. Even after they fell from power, Edward III had reasons to maintain their story rather than expose the truth. And 700 years later, we're still debating what really happened because the people with power successfully controlled the investigation, the evidence, and the narrative. That's not ancient history. That's the blueprint. So what really happened to Edward II? Here's what we know for certain. His face was never shown at his funeral. His own brother believed he was alive. 3 years later, multiple nobles and clergy believe he survived. A credible Italian bishop claimed to have met him in exile. Edward III never investigated his father's murder, and the people who supposedly killed him gave contradictory accounts. Did Edward die at Berkeley Castle on September 21st, 1327? Well, maybe. Or did Isabella and Mortimer stage his death, hide him away, and eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth? The evidence suggests the official story is, at a minimum, incomplete. And at a maximum, it's one of the most successful cover-ups in medieval history. But here's what matters. Whether Edward died that night or lived for 14 more years as a hermit, the conspiracy worked. Isabella and Mortimer got what they wanted. Edward removed from power permanently. Edward III got what he wanted, a stable throne without the chaos of his father's return. And the English nobility got what they wanted, a new regime that protected their interests. Everyone in power benefited from Edward being dead. So he stayed dead, officially. That's how elite conspiracies work. It's not about what's true. It's about what serves the people in power. And when they control the investigation, the evidence, and the narrative, well, you control history itself. The next time you hear an official story about someone's death, especially when that death is politically convenient, when the evidence is controlled, when the questions are shut down, and when everyone in power benefits from that person being gone, remember Edward II. Remember that this playbook is 700 years old. And ask yourself this: what aren't they telling us? I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. Keep investigating, keep questioning, and never trust the official story when the powerful write it.